Thank you very much for your kind introduction, and thank you to attendees for being here on a Sunday morning. So I will tell you about how electronic systems in the public sector are working. What about the identification of citizens? So this is not an ordinary website. It is just a site that has to fulfill a number of requirements and follow the regulation. In my experience, we are seeing significant amount of tremendous things and barbaric things that are in place, and things that are not easy to or quick to solve. Okay, as a way of introduction, well, I would say that I am not involved in pen testing. I'm doing low-level cryptography, so therefore I develop electronic signature system. I don't know whether you have ever used your electronic signature for any processing, public processing. Well, the code and cryptography part of it, I developed it myself. So, well, as I say, I developed the cryptographic layer, the one which is very much in the bottom and which is fortunately running well. I'm also working in MAME, which is an emulation system, a low level as well. This is about simulation of low level system, a low level, and it simulates or emulates the CPUs. And actually, well, now we are more into emulating hardware, temperature control systems, you name it. If you have like an old hardware, digital station, Cynic station, whatever, you just let me know and we will introduce it in our project. Okay, what is an electronic seed? This is not a website. We are not talking about a website. When you go to Social Security website, it's not an actual website. It is the legal equivalent to desk. Actually, the law 2018 regulating the electronic sites says that whatever is published in the electronic site is at the same level as law. As such, it follows specific security mechanism, amongst other identification of citizens in this electronic e-site. So the main point was defined in law of 2011, has been further amended and developed. So administrative procedure of the tax regime of the administration, obliging access through electronic certificates. And as such, so this is the typical site. Probably this is the one that provides a higher number of services to citizens. This is for Social Security. You just can get lots of information about yourself. So each public entity has its own site. So for instance, in FIBE belongs to the Ministry of Industry. When you log on to the website, they do not have an actual site because it depends on a higher entity. This is to say, bread.s. And then when you visit the State Agency of Meteorology, Ministry for Agriculture, the Council of Cordoba, so each and every one of these entities have their sites, which is the way they have to interact on an electronic platform with the citizens. Now I'll show you an example. Main way to identify yourself when you log in is through an electronic certificate. So there was an electronic signature law stating how we could interact on an electronic platform between citizens and public administration. functionality or feature is for signature, and the other one is for authenticating myself. I authenticate myself in a public administration site through an electronic certificate. Because I do it that electronic, I need to have a certificate in my browser for me to identify myself in a browser. And the only way to do it is through SSL with a client certificate. There is no other way to do it. There is one and only way to do it. And now I'd like to show you an example, a very simple example. For instance, when you log into INAP, which is the National Institute for Public Administration, user access, oh, that's new thing, they changed that. Okay, that has been changed. Okay, they did that to annoy me. Okay, we move on to the second part. When I just don't want to authenticate myself through client SSL because I don't like it, I go to an ID provider which will be implementing the client SSL for me. If, for instance, in the web I just don't want to implement the ID system because I just don't want to manage identities, I just use a login from LinkedIn or Facebook. I kind of delegate my ID, but neither Facebook, LinkedIn, nor Microsoft supports authentication by certificate. So therefore, the public administration has developed a product known as Clave that offers some authentication system, one of them being the electronic certificate. Now, going back to the INAP site. Okay, give me a sec. Okay, I'll try to do this rightly. So you may see that I am in domain inap.es, same as I log in through Facebook or through LinkedIn, then it changes the domain. Authentication through key or through Clave, and then it has directed me to clave.gov.es. So I can authenticate myself through an electronic certificate, through PIN, or permanent Clave, or citizens from the UE. Due to the robustness or lack of robustness of some means, some services that can only be accessed through e-certificates, through a password or through an e-certificate. Some processing will have an impact on my rights as a citizen. For instance, if I say to the ministry that I'm living in Somalia, I'm losing my right to have a subsidy for my accommodation. So in those cases, I cannot authenticate myself through a PIN number. I need to authenticate myself through an e-certificate. Firefox is asking me for my e-certificates. I click on access. Then this should redirect me to INAP. Okay, that is me. And the browser asks me for my e-certificate, and that has identified me. This is a system that works in each and every one of web browser because it has been part of the standard for the last 20 years. It will work in Android, in Safari, supported by iOS, Linux, Internet Explorer, Chrome, you name it. Well, I don't know whether it will work with Link or Mosaic, but it works with the rest of the browsers. Well, public sector sites. Well, this is Social Security site. They ask me whether I want to access through digital or e-certificate or through Clave. Well, for this practical case that we're discussing now, this is not relevant, but let us check how the public sector is identifying citizens through the electronic certificates. In case of client SSL, that is to say, having a site asking me to use my e-certificate to go to a site is very, very simple. It has to do with the configuration of the web server. If I configure the web server and I say I want client SSL in this port, in this domain, in this here and there, I have different ways to configure that depending on the quality of the server. It will be asking me for e-certificates in different ways. We could see that in Apache. But I could also ask the server to validate that e-certificate to see whether they have been revoked or not. For instance, if I lose the password of my e-certificate, I call the Mint and I ask them to give me another password for my certificate. And then in the meantime, my certificate is revoked. So when the certificate goes to the web application, I know that the certificate is a valid certificate and it belongs to the user that has logged in, and this is fully supported by administrative procedural law. So when it comes to my applications, as we can see here, I have 7 lines. Well, I have the demo with me, but it's not worthwhile to go through it. So in these 7 lines, I have a certificate. My application, I know that this certificate is valid and there is no way to bypass it. There is no way to impersonate it or anything. This is controlled by Mozilla, Microsoft, in the case of Internet Explorer, serious companies that often do not have any loopholes or any gaps there. So I'm printing out that certificate. The moment I print out the certificate, well, it contains my ID number, and then I check whether the certificate belongs to the citizen, but I don't have to check usernames, password, whether it is valid or not. So this is fully supported by the law. And what I do like from the system is that the complex side is managed by system people, and because I'm more into apps, when I get this app, I only need 8 lines to implement it. Very, very simple. However, what happens when I'm not aware of it, or when I find that this is too complex, or when I feel that I'm very smart and I'm going to do something that the web industry hasn't thought of in the last 15 years, and I'm going to do something which will work much better. And this is what I'm fortunately seeing. And with this I mean this self-signature application for authenticating myself. This is an app for self-signature. I was the father of it for the last 4 years. I don't manage it anymore, and it is an app to develop self-signatures. You might use it if you wish. Okay, this is self-signature or personal signature. I drag it. I drag an XML. It asks me whether I want to sign it. I sign it. I use my e-certificate for it. I save it, and that's it. It has signed the file. So this self-signature app has an interesting feature. Can be invoked from a web app. So for instance, if I am performing a process in public administration, for instance, I don't know, signing a certificate, it is not only about identifying myself as a citizen. When you go to a desk, for instance, the public servant tells behind the desk, ask me to show him my ID card. I'm authenticating myself, but this is different from him asking me to sign the paper. The legal act is different. In this case, we are talking about the SSL authentication, which is equivalent to showing him my ID card, and the other thing is about signing a document. Self-signature has a feature that allows it to be invoked from a web app. Then from there, it goes to signature, and the signature comes back to the web app, and I go ahead with my processing. Okay, this is a typical sequence. The server says, I have a website and it's asking me to perform a process. And then it goes to the browser. The browser invokes the self-signature app, and then I sign it, and then it comes back. It is pretend. So the signature as well as the certificate that I use for my signature are returned. And now I will tell you why it's important for it to return both things. And then the sign process comes back to or is returned to the server. Now I'll give you some context about where all this is run. Browser and the self-signature are on the citizen side. This is a local app and JavaScript is run in my computer. So everything that takes place between the browser and self-signature is run at my home. And because this is so, if I use a debugger or JavaScript of the browser, I could change this process and the server would never find out. Therefore, any security breach in the integration of self-signature could be very easily exploited. The problem comes when there are a number of entities that decide not to use clients SSL but a different mechanism to identify citizens. Then they made up something else. They sent in an authentication token and it says token is to be signed, then the token is validated and then it is considered to be authenticated. Deep inside it is the same thing that client SSL does. We shouldn't think that it's asking me for a certificate. Deep inside what it's doing is just this thing. The advantage of the other is that has been designed by AB3 many years ago and has been verified in terms of security by Microsoft, Google and everyone making up the V3C consortium. So but this thing I'm making that up myself, so therefore it's likely to have security breaches and vulnerabilities. And now I'm going to mention some of the things that are wrongly done and continue to be wrongly done. And this is quite an interesting exercise. That is to say, traveling public sector sites and finding gaps and vulnerabilities. When we find vulnerabilities, you can exploit them carefully, and someone from the Guardia Civil will kind of tell me off because I'm saying this, but this is a good thing for you to do. So security auditors and pen testers, when they are hired, they do not often detect this type of vulnerabilities. I kind of pen testing people do quite of mechanic, vulgar work. It is like the National Police checkpoint at university with a poster saying that most wanted terrorist. However, good cops check body language people and see whether they are sweating and they detect terrorists. So the problem with pen testers, the problem is that pen testers are paid 21 euros an hour. Pen testers, they just use maps, Nexus, known vulnerabilities, and that's it. But this is completely different. This requires to see the logic of the business of authentication to find to detect vulnerabilities. Often they pass a notice in security audits. Well, the first and foremost problem that we find, so predictable token for authentication. The authentication token that is used is time. So sign the time where the processing was made and then you return it back to me. So if the token has been signed within a time frame of 10 minutes, cool. Okay, I give this person 10 minutes, I don't know, just in case he needed to go to the toilet, whatever, before the session expires. No problem there. But the main problem is that token is fully predictable. If I succeed in asking someone to sign a token at a future time, and then let us see what can I do to have someone signing something that I want to sign for me. And because I know that I have a time frame of several minutes. If I have an automated system doing that for me, I could perform or carry out 50 proceedings within this time frame because the token is predictable. So this is up, this is live, at least in three public administration entities. No matter how much you tell them, they don't see it as a significant problem. Now, aberrations. I have kind of a ranking of these barbaric things that can be done. And what else have I seen? This is quite of an interesting thing. I've seen that in two entities of public administration, and this is not only about a predictable token. They just use a fixed token all the time. At the time, the fixed token they were using was the word login. I returned the login word signed, and then it went through the system. But it is not only about me asking the person or making the person signing an authentication token at a future time. But if I manage to identify that token, and if I manage the person to sign that token for me, I could use it as many times as I would like to. And then you may go and say, well, someone in the token validation, they may check the date of the signature. Look, if they are giving me the login as a fixed token, I don't think they will be putting very much brain into validating the time of signature. So therefore, I can I use the token as many times as I would like that. And if through phishing I manage the person to sign the login word, I will have access with his identity to any entities to carry out or to perform any proceedings or processing that I would like to. So I've seen that live. I don't know whether they have corrected that or not. And this is like very, very crazy as well. This is like abomination. I was given an authentication token, and this token was quite complex. It was an HMAC function that had a random number plus the date plus the set login identifier. All that was mixed in an HMAC, and then I had to sign it. But then the token was not verified. So they just checked who has signed it, and they took that identity for a good identity, as a good identity. Well, this is wonderful because you just get a PDF resolution signed by the Secretary of State. Okay, you just get hold of the e-signature, you take it out, you inject it there. Because I can do that with a JavaScript browser very, very easily. Because it is a signature of something, but they don't check what I have signed. I just logged into the e-site like if I were the Secretary of State. This is wonderful, but depending on the entity where I am, I could do, well, different things. And in the testing that I did, well, some of the things that I could see impersonating the Secretary of State, I could see very many things. I'm sure that there are PDFs signed by ministers. I could log into the e-site only through that token. So that is not verified at all. And this is also an interesting case. I said before that self-signature, when returns information to the website, it returns both the electronic signature as well as the e-certificate used for the signature. And this is not random. So you may say, why do I need to have the e-certificate returned? Even if in the signature we can see the identity, why do you have to have the identity of the person signing the documents in separate fashion? Well, this is not a feature that we included originally in our app. Well, when you analyze the signature, you can see the identity of the person signing. Well, we did not include that in self-signature app, but however, some government asked us I can remember one of them, the regional government of a big region here in Spain, and actually I think it was the biggest in Spain. It was kind of in the south of Spain. I won't tell you more. And say, no, 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 we need that. We need that. Please introduce that. I've seen that also in the Ministry of Treasure. And they said, why are you asking me for the ID of the person signing outside the signature? It is because the signature is rules out. When they get this double information, the ID of the person signing, and they use the identity of the signing person, and they take it, they consider that it is an authentication token because the ID identity has to be signed, but is known as public key because it is a public key. And actually there are repositories including people's certificates. And actually National Police Force had one live very up until short ago with people who had processed for signature. This is not the same case as before where they have forgotten to verify it. This time I'm using the public key to log into services offered by the e-administration. And what is worst of these, and they say, this is terrible. Well, the Ministry for Treasury had a very serious problem in place, because the system was for top managers. It took them 2 years to correct a vulnerability that had been reported. And I said, careful, we are logging in with a key, public key. And I said, well, it's really, really complicated to change it. Really? Is it that complicated? You are leaving the back door of the ministry open. And you're saying that it is very difficult for you to hire a porter. So I just don't get it, okay? I just don't see the doesn't make any sense at all for me. And of the examples that I showed you, there are two of them do not require any special tool for me, just to get right to the kitchen. So the case when I authenticate myself through a public key, and then there are other two cases, one with fixed token and predictable token, where I need the user to sign that token. How can I make a user signing electronically the text that I want him to sign?
This characteristic in Autofirma, self-signature, which I wanted to take it out, but I wasn't allowed to. And it can sign on a website with no interaction with the client. We requested this, and they say, oh, it's really bothering to ask the person to choose the certificate and say yes. It's better if we don't request anything and we signed without any permission from the user. So an app which is distributed, there are many citizens using them in many public organizations. I'm including a functionality where I can sign with no authorization from the user. Let's test something. Where do I have this? You cannot see it because my presentation is open. Here. This is a website of mine. If I manage to have I used the get to this site, Google Chrome has a limitation. I cannot open external applications without an interaction of the user. So I need to force the user to press a button or a link. But Internet Explorer Firefox, I can do it like this, just when the user enters. And pay attention to the sequence. I press sign, I click on sign, you see Autofirma open, You see the splash, and the browser is opened before that disappears. Even if I use Alt F4 while the splash is there, I cannot close the app. There's the splash. But since we've implemented a series of processes in the background, I've just received the signature. We can sign in batches, the same interaction in which the user didn't have the opportunity to cancel, he wasn't asked anything, he's electronically signed something, he's signed whatever I wanted. I mean, it's high world. But it could have been 10, 15 signatures. 75% of the time of the out of operation is loading the key to sign, and the 25% is using them. So that 2 seconds the app took to open and return the signature, with just another second I could have had 7 or 8 additional signatures without requesting authorization. Even better, the application Autofirma, instead of returning the signature to the browser, it could be returned to a server. Even if the guy closes the browser very quickly, you cannot stop the app because you can't. It's returning the signatures to a server even if I've closed the browser. So that's great. So I can get an authentication token to access the seats, the public websites, just by forcing users to access a website. It's quite a simple phishing. You can use free porn or anything. Any stupid page, any fake news, and the guy accesses. Share it through WhatsApp. There are 1,000 ways of making users access a website and press a button. In Chrome, you have to press a button, but in Internet Explorer and Firefox, they don't need to do anything. The splash is shown, but that's already too late. When you see the splash, you've already signed. So the situation is perfect. We have a lot of public services websites which are critical. These agencies manage security issues which are very important. And a function Autofirma, if you've made a mistake, you're going to pay for it. It's a miracle that nothing really serious happens. What happens when you detect this type of things and you report them? In my experience, well, I have a mixed experience. I've reported it. I think I can say this. There was a quite serious mistake to the Ministry of Industry. I called, "Hey guys, I've seen something wrong on your website." "Oh yes, wait." A day later, an auditor calls me from an external web company. "No, we've audited it for 5 years. There's no mistake. Do you have 10 minutes? "Yes." "Wow, that's crazy." 2 weeks later, they call me to tell me that it's corrected. A week later, it's in production. A month later, it's not public. It's not public. I've been answered to another organization. Here, the auditor was lazier. He said, no, there's no mistake. I cannot replicate it." Well, maybe you don't know how to. You can pay me because this is my job. I can do it for you. Or you learned how to do it. And I say, no, you can't. Yes, you can. Help me. Okay, I help you. And they said, okay, you're right. But this process took 3 months. The usual thing is you send an email and you don't receive an answer. Sometimes I've answered to tenders about electronic public service websites, adding new functionalities. I've included in my conditions will improve the mistakes of your website, which is this list. A few months later, the same mistake is there. It's really discouraging. And let's go back to our presentation. I wanted to finish here to have a little bit of time. So the message here is if there's something the industry people more intelligent that we are, and all of us, because a combination of very big companies, they've created a standard with web authentication system. Use it. Don't invent yours. And if you invent one, please have a good reason, not just because it's going to be a lot of work, because it's going to be a lot of work. And do things right. And the third, if someone has just called you or written an email to you saying that you did a bad job, answer and say, what did I get wrong? And now, what should we do, those of us who like this industry? We should go through every seat that is using Autofirma for authentication. There are more and more. Very recently, I saw a tender for an organization that said that the implementation of the seat has to be done through Autofirma. Let's try to find who's doing a bad job. Let's report it. And we need to raise awareness. Do a good job, don't leave holes. If things work out of a miracle. In the organizations I've seen, they didn't have security breaches, they hadn't had any problem. Why? Because hackers are doing something else, or there are no economic interests in these attacks. The problem is that this belong to the public sector, so my data as a citizen are here. Let's try to improve the public sector. So we're finishing a bit ahead of time. I hope you liked it. Thank you very much.